a husband everyone trusted, a wife full of life, 2 innocent little girls, and 1 ordinary morning. The entire family vanished without a trace. No forced entry, no screams, just silence. Behind that silence, a father hiding the darkest evil imaginable. He cried for cameras, lied to police, and slept in the same house after murder. What makes a man slaughter his entire family? What was he trying to escape? What you LLC in this series? Isn't just a crime-est psychological horror buried in real life. Secret recordings, hidden texts, a twisted double life. Watch carefully, because once you start, you'll never forget the truth you're about to hear. What you just heard is only the surface. The darkest secrets are still to come. Don't skip a second, because the next twist will leave you speechless, and tell us in the comments what shocked you the most. It was a quiet Sunday evening in Frederick, Colorado. The date was August 12, 2018. Shanann Watts returned home from a business trip just after 1:30 a.m. Nicole Atkinson had dropped her off and watched her walk through the front door of her home on Saratoga Trail. From the outside, the Watts residence looked picture perfect. 2 stories, a clean yard, a family SUV parked in the driveway, the kind of house that whispered success, love, and stability. Shanann was active on social media, regularly posting about her 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, and her husband, Chris Watts. Her followers saw a strong, independent woman devoted to her family. Her posts spoke of love, resilience, and gratitude. She often described Chris as the perfect father and partner, but behind the filters and hashtags something much darker was brewing. To the outside world, Chris and Shanann had it all. A beautiful home, 2 adorable daughters, and a life many envied. Shanann worked as a promoter for Thrive, a wellness brand, which she proudly supported on Facebook Live videos and regular updates. She praised her husband, often gushing about his support and dedication. But these glowing posts were covering cracks in the marriage. Friends later reported that Shanann had been under stress. Chris, once affectionate and attentive, had grown distant. He no longer showed interest in physical intimacy or family activities. Shanann chalked it up to work stress and tried to rekindle the connection by planning a romantic getaway and keeping her hopes alive. Chris was not one to share his life publicly. He came off as reserved, easygoing, and mild. Those who knew him described him as a nice guy, someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. He worked as an operator at Anadarko Petroleum, a well-paying job that kept him busy. Behind the scenes, however, Chris had started an affair with a co-worker named Nico. Their relationship had intensified over the summer, while Shanann and the kids were visiting her family in North Carolina. With his wife and daughters out of town, Chris experienced a taste of freedom. He worked out, lost weight, changed his appearance, and started imagining a new life, one without his current family. Nicole believed he was separating from Shanann. She later told investigators that Chris claimed he was going through a divorce. She had no idea of the darkness he was about to unleash. In the days leading up to August 13, 2018, things were tense. Shanann had just returned from a work trip in Arizona. During her time away, she had expressed concerns to friends via text that Chris was avoiding her, not answering calls, and showing cold behavior. In one message she wrote, "He has changed so much. I don't know who he is anymore." On Saturday, August 11th, Shanann texted Chris asking if he was okay. He responded, saying he was tired. That night he hired a babysitter and went out. Not with friends, but to dinner with Nicole. Shanann, unaware of his double life, was still trying to save their marriage. She left him a handwritten letter that night, pouring out her love and asking him to fight for their family. But Chris had already made up his mind. Nicole Atkinson, Shanann's close friend, became alarmed the next morning. Shanann had missed a doctor's appointment and wasn't answering calls or texts. Nicole drove to the Watts home, rang the doorbell, and knocked. No answer. She called Chris, who was at work. He told her Shanann had taken the girls on a play date, but that didn't add up. Nicole contacted the police. Within hours, officers arrived at the Watts home. Chris returned shortly after and allowed them in. The scene inside was eerie. Shanann's purse was on the counter. Her phone was found wedged in the couch cushions, and her car with the children's car seats was still in the garage. Nothing looked like someone had left for the day, but there was no sign of Shanann or the girls. The police body cam footage from that morning is now widely known. Chris appeared calm, almost too calm. He avoided eye contact, paced nervously, and spoke in rehearsed tones. Officers noted his strange behavior but had no hard evidence yet. Neighbors were interviewed. One neighbor showed police his home security footage. It captured Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning and loading something into it. The neighbor, visibly shaken, told officers, "He's not acting right. He's never backed his truck in before." Meanwhile, Shanann's family and friends were panicking. They launched social media campaigns, shared her photo everywhere, and pleaded with the public to help find her. The case had now drawn national attention. On August 14th, just one day after the disappearance, Chris appeared on local news. Standing on his front porch, arms crossed tightly, he pleaded for the return of his wife and daughters. "Shanann, Bella, if you're out there, come back," he said. "If someone has them, please bring them back." But viewers and investigators weren't buying it. His words felt hollow, his demeanor too controlled. The fatherly concern seemed more like a performance. Online detectives and social media users quickly latched on, dissecting every movement, every blink. As the investigation progressed, police discovered troubling data. Chris had deleted texts, cleared his phone's location history, and was lying about the timeline. This isn't just a crime story, it's the real pain of a family torn apart. If you feel for Shanann and her children, watch till the end and comment their names below to honor their memory. He failed a polygraph test, and his stories kept changing. Nicole Kessinger, now aware of the situation, cooperated with authorities and handed over messages revealing their secret relationship. Chris was now cornered. Investigators brought him in for questioning again. This time, he asked to speak to his father. In a cold, controlled voice, he admitted to killing Shanann, but claimed she had smothered the girls first, and he killed her in a rage. It was a lie, but it cracked open the case. With that confession, the floodgates opened. Police obtained search warrants, began digging at the oil site where Chris worked, and pieced together GPS data. They discovered the horrifying truth. Chris had murdered Shanann in their bed, then smothered his daughters, and dumped their bodies at a remote oil field owned by his company. The bodies were discovered 2 days later. Shanann was found in a shallow grave. The 2 little girls had been shoved into oil tanks. Investigators and the public were horrified. Later autopsy reports confirmed that Shanann, Bella and Celeste were smothered, and signs of struggle were found. Bella had bite marks on her tongue, likely from trying to scream. The double life Chris had built collapsed. The story of the Watts family turned into one of the most chilling domestic crime cases in American history. Experts began analyzing Chris's mental state. He didn't have a history of violence, he wasn't a drug user. There was no documented mental illness. What led a seemingly normal man to commit such an unthinkable act? Psychologists speculated narcissistic personality traits, suppressed rage, and the family annihilator archetype. Chris wanted a fresh start. In his twisted thinking, murder was the only way out. Nicole was horrified. She cut all ties and gave multiple interviews. She denied knowing Chris would ever harm his family. The community mourned. Shanann's family gave heartbreaking statements, and the media swarmed every angle, every detail. August 13, 2018, a Monday morning, began quietly in Frederick, Colorado. But for one household, the stillness wasn't peace, it was the eerie onset of a nightmare. Shanann Watts, 34 years old and 15 weeks pregnant, had returned home the night before from a business trip in Arizona. Her friend and colleague Nicole Atkinson had dropped her off at approximately 1:48 a.m. after they both flew back together. Nicole, who was very close to Shanann, knew her routines and personality intimately. Shanann was meticulous, always on time, always in communication, and extremely serious about her pregnancy health. When Nicole hadn't received a reply from Shanann by 8 a.m., she immediately grew concerned. Shanann had a scheduled OBGYN appointment that morning that she had been eagerly awaiting. Missing it was unthinkable. Nicole began calling and texting but received no response. Shanann's social media had gone silent. Nicole drove straight to the Watts residence. Her knocks on the front door went unanswered. The garage door was closed, but through the window she could see Shanann's Lexus parked inside. This raised more questions. Why would Shanann leave without her car, especially with 2 small children? Nicole called Chris Watts, Shanann's husband. He seemed calm and unconcerned. He claimed Shanann had taken the girls' 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste to a friend's house for a playdate, but he didn't specify who the friend was. When Nicole asked him to come home and check, he hesitated but eventually agreed. Worried that something terrible had happened, Nicole called 911. Officer Scott Coonrod of the Frederick Police Department arrived and met Nicole outside the house. With Chris now in sight, police were allowed to enter the home. Inside, they found Shanann's purse on the kitchen counter, complete with wallet, keys, and her medications. Her phone was tucked oddly between couch cushions. Her shoes, ones she wore daily, were at the door. The children's blankets and stuffed animals were gone, but their car seats were still in the garage. If Shanann had taken the children anywhere, she would have used those. The entire scene looked staged. Something wasn't right. As the investigation began in earnest, Chris gave his first statements to police. He said he and Shanann had a conversation early that morning, around 4:00 a.m. He claimed it was an emotional but non-violent talk about separating. According to him, she told him she was taking the girls to a friend's house and never returned. Chris agreed to a walk-through of the home. Officer Coonrod wore a body camera that recorded everything. Viewers who later analyzed the footage noted several odd behaviors. Chris was fidgety, avoided eye contact, and never once called out his daughter's names while searching the house. Meanwhile, a neighbor offered up surveillance footage from the motion-activated camera over his garage. It showed Chris backing his work truck into the garage at 5:27 a.m. and making multiple trips loading items into the truck. This contradicted his statement that he last saw Shanann and the girls as they were leaving. More alarm bells went off. That night, local news stations began airing the story. Chris appeared on Denver 7, appealing for the return of his wife and children. He stood in his driveway, arms folded tightly across his chest, and said, Shanann, Bella, Celeste. If you're out there, just come back. The public immediately sensed something was off. Think you've figured it out? Think again. The most disturbing part of this case hasn't even started. Watch the full episode and drop your theory in the comments. We're reading them all. His tone was emotionless. He didn't seem frantic or grief-stricken. He didn't beg or cry. Internet sleuths and true crime fans began dissecting his words, his posture, his Investigators brought Chris in for further questioning. On August 14th, he consented to take a polygraph test administered by Tammy Lee, a seasoned FBI agent. Before the test, she told him, "This is your chance to show us you had nothing to do with her disappearance." Chris failed the polygraph miserably. When confronted with the results, Chris's demeanor shifted. He became defensive, evasive. Tammy and another investigator, Graham Coder, pushed harder. Finally, Chris asked to speak to his father, Ronnie Watts. During their emotional conversation, Chris made a partial confession. He claimed Shanann had killed the girls after he asked for a separation, and in a fit of rage, he killed her. Investigators didn't buy the story. They knew the pieces didn't fit, but it was enough to hold him. Over the next few days, the story began to unravel. Chris's affair with co-worker Nicole Kessinger came to light. He had told her he was in the process of separating, and they had spent romantic evenings together while Shanann was away. Nicole was horrified when the news broke and voluntarily met with investigators. She provided phone records, Google searches, and other data showing Chris had been lying to both her and police. Faced with mounting evidence, Chris finally confessed. On August 5th, he told investigators what really happened. Early that morning, after a confrontation with Shanann in the bedroom, he strangled her to death. Then, as his daughters woke up and asked where Mommy was, he told them she was sick. He wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet, placed it in the truck, and put the two girls in the backseat. He drove 45 minutes to an oil site owned by Anadarko Petroleum, his employer. There, in the middle of the remote plains, he smothered Celeste with her own blanket while Bella watched. Then he did the same to Bella. Her last words, later revealed in his prison confession, were "Daddy." He buried Shanann in a shallow grave near the site and placed his daughters' bodies in separate oil tanks. He believed the oil would mask the smell and slow decay. For 2 days, he tried to maintain a facade of innocence, doing interviews and sending text messages to Shanann's phone. On August 16th, the bodies were recovered. Autopsies confirmed what investigators already suspected. All three had been murdered. Public outrage was swift and unforgiving. The image of a smiling family shattered. Experts labeled Chris a classic family annihilator, motivated by a desire to erase his obligations and begin a new life. He didn't want a divorce. He wanted freedom at any cost. As the legal case began to mount, Chris sat behind bars in Weld County Jail. Prosecutors filed 9 charges, 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a body. The evidence was overwhelming. From surveillance footage to text messages, GPS logs, and most damning, his own words. Inside the jail, Chris's behavior continued to puzzle officers. He didn't cry. He barely spoke. When he did, it was often mechanical, rehearsed. He asked if he could see photos of his daughters. He requested the Bible. One officer later said he was either numb or he was pretending. The FBI, CBI, and local police continued their interviews. They interviewed co-workers, neighbors, friends, and Shanann's family. Everyone had the same story. Shanann adored her children. She had recently been ecstatic about the new baby, a boy they were going to name Nico. Chris, on the other hand, had become increasingly withdrawn in the weeks leading up to the murders. He was losing weight, working out more, and texting Nicole frequently. He deleted conversations and browser history, searched for apartments and how to start a new life. He had already told Nicole he would be divorced by September. On November 6, 2018, Chris changed his plea to guilty, avoiding the death penalty as part of a plea deal. Shanann's family, heartbroken but tired of the public spectacle, supported the deal. At the sentencing hearing on November 19th, Shanann's family gave heartbreaking impact statements. Frank Ruchek, Shanann's father, spoke directly to Chris. "I trusted you to take care of my daughter and my grandbabies. You betrayed that trust. You are a monster." The judge delivered 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively. Chris was transferred out of Colorado for his own safety and is now housed in Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Later interviews and letters from Chris revealed chilling details. He said Bella had walked in as he was wrapping Shanann in a sheet and asked, "What are you doing with Mommy?" He claimed he didn't know what to say. The world was horrified. Documentaries, books, and podcasts began exploring the case in detail. American Murder: The Family Next Door, a Netflix documentary released in 2020, brought the story back into the public spotlight. Viewers around the globe were left asking, how could someone do this? To this day, the Watts family murders serve as a chilling reminder that darkness can exist behind the most polished exterior. What looked like the perfect family was in truth a house of horrors waiting to collapse. In the early hours of August 13, 2018, Frederick, Colorado was quiet. The morning air was still. The streets were empty, and the Watts home, Gust, another house in a suburban neighborhood, was silent. Inside, however, the silence was hiding a horrific truth. Shanann Watts. Every view, every comment, helps spread awareness about hidden abuse. Don't just watch, be part of the voice that demands justice. Comment justice for Shanann if you're with us. Had just returned home from a business trip in Arizona. It was around 1:48 a.m. when her friend, Nicole Atkinson, dropped her off at the door. Tired, pregnant, and carrying her suitcase, Shanann stepped inside the home she shared with her husband Chris and their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. She had no idea it would be the last time she'd ever walk through that door. Chris Watts had been planning something unspeakable. In the weeks leading up to this night, he had begun an affair with a co-worker, Nicole. He had told her he was in the process of separating from Shanann, even though that wasn't entirely true. He started dreaming of a new life, one without the responsibilities of family, one where he could be with Nicole freely, unburdened. But divorce wasn't enough for Chris. He wanted a clean break, and in his twisted mind, that meant removing his family entirely. That night, once Shanann entered the bedroom, an argument began. She had noticed his strange behavior over the past weeks, his coldness, his distance, his change in routine. She had confronted him via text messages and in person, but he denied everything. This time, however, Chris admitted it. He was having an affair. He told Shanann he no longer loved her. The confrontation escalated. Shanann, shocked and heartbroken, cried and pleaded, but Chris, calm and detached, climbed on top of her and strangled her with his bare hands. It took several minutes. She fought back, scratching his neck in desperation. He didn't stop. In the end, she died in her bed, the same bed where they had once laughed, loved, and dreamed of the future. Unbeknownst to Chris, their daughter Bella had woken up. She wandered into the room moments later. "What's wrong with Mommy?" she asked. Chris told her Mommy was sick. Then, in an act of staggering cruelty, he wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet and dragged her down the stairs. He placed the body in the back of his work truck. He then put Bella and Celeste, still alive, in the back seat. They were confused but quiet. Their pajamas were still on, and they carried their favorite blankets. Chris drove for 45 minutes to an oil site owned by Anadarko Petroleum, his employer. It was still dark when they arrived. The site was remote, isolated from view, surrounded by open plains. There, he would commit the unthinkable. He first buried Shanann's body in a shallow grave he had dug days earlier. Then, he turned to his daughters. He smothered Celeste with her blanket as Bella watched. Then as Bella cried, begged, and pleaded, he did the same to her. Her final words would haunt the world. "Daddy, no." Chris climbed up to the top of 2 large oil tanks and dropped each of their bodies inside. The tanks were filled with crude oil. He believed the toxic liquid would conceal them. In total, he had murdered his entire family in under 4 hours. Back at home, Chris resumed his normal routine. He texted co-workers, made phone calls, and even reached out to Shanann's phone pretending to be concerned. When Nicole Atkinson grew worried that Shanann wasn't responding and came by the house, Chris acted surprised. He claimed he didn't know where she was. He even allowed police to search the home. Inside, they found Shanann's purse, her phone stuffed between couch cushions, her medications, and her car still in the garage. It made no sense. The police began to suspect something more sinister. Chris gave several interviews to local news stations, standing on his driveway with folded arms, saying he missed his wife and daughters and hoped they'd come home. But his demeanor was flat, his eyes void of emotion. Viewers noticed something was off. A neighbor turned over surveillance footage from a camera above his garage. It showed Chris backing his work truck into the garage early that morning, something he never did. Police began digging deeper. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed miserably. The FBI agent conducting the test told him, "There's no way you're telling the truth." When confronted with the results, Chris asked to speak with his father. In a recorded interview, he confessed to killing Shanann but claimed it was after she had killed the girls. Investigators didn't believe him. Eventually, Chris told the full truth. He had admitted to killing all 3. The bodies were recovered on August 16, 2018, 3 days after the murders. Public outrage was swift and furious. How could a man do this to his own family? What pushed him to such extremes? Details of the case shocked the nation. Chris had been living a double life, romancing Nicole while simultaneously pretending to be a loving father. He had gone on dates, sent her love notes, and even researched vacation spots. Nicole, realizing the truth, cooperated with investigators. She was devastated. She said she had no idea Chris would do something so terrible. She handed over her phone, showing searches like can police trace deleted messages and how to prepare for a new life. While some questioned her innocence, authorities found no evidence of her involvement. In the aftermath, Chris was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, tampering with evidence, and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. He faced the possibility of the death penalty. Shanann's family, in the depths of their grief, requested that prosecutors not seek the death penalty. They wanted the case to end without more loss of life. Chris later pled guilty to all charges, accepting 5 life sentences without parole. The community mourned. Memorials were held. The house was surrounded by flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes. The pink bicycles in the driveway became symbols of innocence lost. Chris was moved to a prison in Wisconsin for his own safety. He now spends his days in isolation, reading the Bible and writing letters. Some claim he has found religion. Others believe he is just hiding behind faith. In 2020, Netflix released American Murder: The Family Next Door, a documentary that used real text messages, social media posts, and police bodycam footage to tell the story. It shocked viewers worldwide. The world had seen many true crime cases before, but this one hit differently. It wasn't about greed or revenge. It was about a man who chose freedom over family, who murdered, not out of rage but convenience, who destroyed 3 lives and an unborn child just to start fresh. In the wake of a triple homicide that left a nation stunned, Chris Watts, the husband and father turned killer, now faced the full weight of justice. The story had shifted from mystery to nightmare, and the world watched as law enforcement, the judicial system, and a grieving family sought answers and accountability. Behind the courtroom doors, truths would be revealed, emotions laid bare, and justice finally pursued. As the news of Shanann Watts and her daughter's murders spread across the country, Weld County law enforcement and the FBI worked tirelessly to build their case. Evidence gathered from the Watts home, Chris's phone, vehicle GPS, data, surveillance footage, and interviews with family, co-workers, and neighbors began to create a chilling and irrefutable timeline. Chris Watts had initially claimed ignorance. He told police that he didn't know where Shanann had gone. He suggested she might have left him. He said she was emotional, maybe even depressed, but investigators quickly saw cracks in his story. The surveillance footage provided by a neighbor showed Chris backing his work truck into the garage at 5:27 a.m. on August 13th, something he had never done before. Inside that truck, authorities would later confirm, were the bodies of his pregnant wife and their 2 daughters. As suspicion mounted, Chris was brought in for a polygraph test conducted by FBI Special Agent Tammy Lee. The test was a turning point. "I'm going to be very honest with you," she told Chris. "You did not pass the polygraph test." Confronted with the results, Chris remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked for his father, Ronnie Watts. When his father entered the room, Chris broke down and whispered that he had killed Shanann at first. He claimed she had killed the girls, and he had reacted in a rage. But his story continued to unravel. Within days under further questioning, Chris finally admitted to killing all 3. He had strangled Shanann in their bedroom, smothered Celeste in the back seat of his work truck, and then murdered Bella, who had watched it all unfold. On August 16, 2018, authorities recovered the bodies from the oil site in Rogan, Colorado. Shanann had been buried in a shallow grave. Bella and Celeste had been submerged in 2 separate oil tanks. The autopsy reports confirmed their causes of death: manual strangulation and asphyxiation. With the evidence overwhelming and the confessions recorded, the district attorney's office prepared to press formal charges. On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was charged with 9 criminal counts: 5 counts of first degree, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. The public response was immediate and intense. Vigils were held across the country. Thousands of people donated to memorial funds. Social media was flooded with tributes, anger, and demands for justice. The question on everyone's mind: why? Behind the scenes, Shanann's family faced unimaginable grief. Her parents, Frank and Sandra Ruchek, had lost their daughter, 2 granddaughters, an unborn grandson Nico, all in one morning. They had to endure not only the loss but the public spectacle that followed. Despite the pain, the Ozucheks made one critical decision. They did not want the death penalty. They believed taking another life would not ease their own suffering. District Attorney Michael Rourke honored their request. Chris's public defenders quietly negotiated a plea deal. Chris would avoid trial by pleading guilty to all charges. In exchange, he would receive life in prison without the possibility of parole. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts stood in court. It was his first major public appearance since the confession. Reporters packed the room. Camera shutters clicked softly as he entered. Shanann's family sat behind the prosecutor. The courtroom was silent as the judge asked Chris if he understood the charges and the consequences of pleading guilty. Chris, in a low, emotionless voice, responded, "Yes, sir." No statement of apology. No attempt at explanation. Just 9 guilty pleas. The sentencing was set for November 19, 2018. By that time, the world had seen the smiling family photos, Shanann's pregnancy announcement, and the haunting last videos of Bella singing to her unborn brother. These moments of joy now stood in brutal contrast to what Chris had done. The sentencing hearing opened with the prosecution presenting the facts. They described Chris's actions with surgical precision. The timeline, the evidence, the psychological profile. They painted a picture of a man who had not snapped but planned. A man who chose personal freedom over his family's lives. Then came the emotional gut punch, the victim impact statements. Frank Ruchek stood, shaking slightly. Tears filled his eyes as he addressed Chris. "I trusted you. I welcomed you into my family. I gave you my daughter, and you took her from me. You stole everything. You didn't just kill them, you erased them." Sandra Ruchek followed, her voice barely above a whisper. I still hear them. I hear Bella's laughter. I see cease running through my house. And now, it's all gone. I don't know how you could look at their faces and do what you did. The judge then delivered his ruling. He sentenced Chris Watts to 5 consecutive life sentences without parole. 48 years for unlawful termination of a pregnancy, 36 years for tampering with 3. Bodie's Chris remained expressionless as the sentence was read. In that moment, he ceased to be a man with a future. He was now inmate number 674,796 in the Colorado Department of Corrections. Due to threats from other inmates and the high-profile nature of the case, Chris was transferred from Colorado to a prison in Wisconsin Dodge Correctional Institution. He remains there in protective custody, rarely interacting with others. From prison, Chris began corresponding with people who wrote him letters. In one such letter, he confessed even more details. He admitted that Bella fought back, that she screamed for her life, that she knew what he was doing. I hear her voice every day, he wrote. Some saw this as remorse. Others saw it as manipulation, a way to stay relevant in the media. Regardless, the letters only deepened the public's horror. Meanwhile, Nico Kessinger disappeared from public life. She changed her name and location. She was never charged with any crime, and investigators found no evidence that she knew of the murders before they happened. Still, public opinion was unforgiving. She became a ghost, erased by association. Shanann's family, despite their suffering, became advocates. They launched the Shanann Watts Foundation, aimed at raising awareness about domestic violence and protecting families. Frank and Sandra spoke publicly about the signs of emotional abuse and the dangers of silence. In 2020, the Netflix documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door was released. Using only real footage, texts, Facebook videos, police bodycams, the film presented the case without narration. It let the people involved tell the story. It became one of the most watched true crime documentaries ever. The Watts home in Frederick was eventually put up for auction, but it struggled to sell. Neighbors avoided walking past it. For many, it wasn't just a crime scene, it was a broken promise, a place that had lost its soul. Chris Watts, now years into his sentence, reportedly spends most of his time in solitary confinement. He has little to no contact with the outside world. Occasionally, letters are made public, rambling thoughts about God, guilt, and isolation. But for the Ruchek family, the pain remains. They visit the graves, they light candles, they read bedtime stories to the headstones, and they remember not the crime, but their lives. Bella's bright smile, Cease's playful giggles, Shanann's laughter and dreams, Nico, who'd never had a chance to see the world. The courtroom delivered justice. But justice cannot replace love. It cannot erase the nightmares. It cannot fill an empty chair at Christmas or the silence on birthdays. Only 1 in 10 viewers catch the hidden clue in the last 30 seconds of this video. Are you that one? Watch it closely, then comment what you discovered. Let's see who's really paying attention. The sentencing of Chris Watts was supposed to mark the end of a horrifying chapter in American criminal history. He had been found guilty and was handed multiple life sentences for the murder of his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. To the public, justice had been served, but for Shanann's family, and for millions around the world who had followed the case with horror and heartbreak, the conclusion of the courtroom drama was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new and equally painful journey. In the days following the sentencing, Shanann's family returned to North Carolina, attempting to piece together what remained of their lives. The Ruchek family had not only lost their daughter and grandchildren, but had been thrust into the national spotlight. With that visibility came support, but also a wave of unexpected cruelty. A disturbing number of conspiracy theorists began to claim that the murders were a hoax. They flooded social media with lies, photoshopped images, and vile theories suggesting that the victims never existed, or that the Azucheks were actors in a staged event. These baseless attacks devastated the family. Frank and Sandra Ruchek, Shanann's parents, found themselves not only grieving, but also fighting to protect the memory of their daughter and grandchildren. They eventually filed lawsuits against several individuals who had spread these defamatory conspiracy theories. Their legal battle was a painful but necessary step to defend their family's honor and dignity. They won judgments in court, setting an important precedent for victims of online harassment. As the months passed, the Watts family home in Frederick, Colorado, stood as a grim reminder of the tragedy. Neighbors avoided walking past the house, and many reported nightmares and anxiety. Despite attempts to sell the property, no buyer came forward. The house remained empty, a haunted symbol of lost innocence and evil concealed beneath a suburban roof. Meanwhile, Chris Watts was moved out of Colorado for his safety and transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. There, he was held in protective custody, isolated and shunned by other inmates. He spent most of his time in a solitary cell. From prison, Chris began writing letters and speaking to people through correspondence. In some of these letters, he claimed to have found religion and expressed remorse. But his words rang hollow for many, especially the Ruchek family. His letters described dreams of meeting his family in heaven, of hearing Bella's voice, and even seeing visions of whether these were true moments of guilt or calculated efforts to regain sympathy was widely debated. In 2020, the case gained renewed attention when Netflix released the documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door. The film was unique in its approach, using only real footage and Facebook videos, text messages, and police bodycam recordings to tell the story. There was no narrator. The people involved spoke for themselves. The documentary reached millions around the world. Viewers were shocked not only by the brutality of the murders, but by how normal the family seemed just days before the crime. Shanann was portrayed as a vibrant, loving mother who had no idea of the darkness growing inside her husband. One of the most heart-wrenching parts of the documentary was hearing Bella sing, "My daddy is a hero," in a home video, words that would later feel impossibly tragic. Public reactions to the documentary varied. Some viewers felt overwhelming sympathy for Shanann and her children, while others began to pick apart her personality and social media presence, falling into the same victim-blaming patterns that so often occur in cases of domestic violence. But the larger conversation turned toward awareness. Advocacy organizations used the case to highlight emotional abuse, financial control, and psychological manipulation as forms of domestic violence. Shanann had spoken of Chris becoming distant, losing interest in her pregnancy, and acting cold in the weeks leading up to the murders. These were red flags, ones that might not scream danger to outsiders but are in fact early signs of emotional abandonment and risk. The Ruchek family did not retreat. Instead, they became outspoken advocates for change. They established programs in Shanann's name to support victims of domestic violence. They participated in interviews, gave speeches, and fought to protect other families from similar tragedies. Their strength turned their pain into power. On anniversaries of the murders, memorials were held across the country. People from all walks of life, many who had never met the Watts family, gathered to remember Bella, Celeste, Shanann, and baby Nico. Vigils were lit. Messages were shared. Their names became symbols of both sorrow and strength. One powerful initiative, inspired by the case, was a push for stronger legal protections for pregnant women and children in domestic settings. Lawmakers proposed new legislation, including enhanced penalties for crimes against pregnant women and additional resources for early intervention in emotionally abusive relationships. Though a law bearing Shanann's name has not yet passed, advocacy continues. Survivors of domestic violence now share her story in shelters, therapy groups, and public awareness campaigns. Her voice, captured in countless Facebook videos, continues to inspire others to speak up and seek help. Even years later, the story of the Watts family resonates. Colleges include the case in psychology and criminology curricula. Podcasters, authors, and journalists revisit the events, not for spectacle, but to better understand how such evil can hide in plain sight. Chris Watts became an archetype, the man with the picture-perfect life who turned into a murderer. His face is a cautionary tale, his actions a warning. His name may live on, but not as he would have wished. He is not remembered as a father or a husband. He is remembered as a liar, a manipulator, and a killer. In contrast, Shanann's memory has grown more powerful with time. Her optimism, her love for her children, and her unwavering belief in family became her legacy. In her own words, posted online shortly before her death, "I'm doing what I love, with the people I love." That message, so simple and pure, remains a guiding light for those navigating the shadows of grief. Her daughters, too, are remembered. Bella's drawings, her gentle nature, her courage in the face of fear, Celeste's energy, her bright smile, her playfulness, and Nico, the child who never took his first breath, remains a reminder of what was lost before it even had the chance to be found. The Watts home may never be lived in again. Chris Watts may never walk free, but the story isn't about them anymore. It is about the people who rose in the wake of destruction, the family who turned pain into advocacy, the friends who refused to forget, and the strangers who lit candles for children they never knew. Legacy isn't just what we leave behind when we're gone. It's what others carry forward in our name. And in that sense, the legacy of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico is one of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children.